Monday, November 15th. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Mayor Gear is out this week, so Bruce McDougall, Mayor Pro Tem, I'll be standing in her place for the evening. Ms. Hunt, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Carter?
Present.
Mr. Young? Mr. Walters?
Here.
Ms. Cleland McGrath?
Here.
Ms. Moulton?
Here.
Mr. McDougall?
Here.
Mr. Miller? Thank you.
Mr. McDougall.
Mr. Carter.
I'd like to excuse or move to excuse Mr. Miller. He's unable to attend tonight.
All right, thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. This one I think we can just do, all in favor, say aye, please.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same side. All right, motion approved.
Mr. McDougall,
Ms. Moulton.
I would also like to move to excuse Mr. Young tonight. He is out of town.
Second.
All right, a motion and a second to excuse Mr. Young. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right, thank you, motion approved. All right, and now we'll rise to salute the flag. All right, now we're actually going to, the City Council and the City Attorney are going to meet in executive session to discuss potential litigation or litigation as allowed by RCW 4230110.1I. The council will be in executive session until approximately 6:20 p.m. At the conclusion of the executive session, the regular meeting will resume. Thank you. All right, good evening again. Council has just come out of executive session on potential litigation per RCW 42.30.110 1I, where no action was taken. At this time, I move to amend tonight's agenda to add Resolution 3061, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Anacortes authorizing litigation to abate a public nuisance by William Colburn and Denise Colburn. Once that the motion is seconded and approved, sorry.
Second.
Right. Yes. Can we take a vote to amend the agenda, please?
A second. Yes.
No.
I make a motion to take action on Resolution 3061.
Mr. McDougall,
Mr. Walters.
if the motion is to approve the resolution, yes?
Thank you.
I'd
Yes.
second that.
All right, we have a motion to approve and a second. Ms. Hunt, would you take the roll?
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath?
Yes.
Ms. Moulton?
Yes.
Mr. McDougall?
Yes.
Mr. Carter?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. All right, back to our regularly scheduled program. We'll be moving to Section 4 of the agenda, announcements and committee reports. First one we have is a COVID report, which I have right here. So as of this week, the state of Washington has reported a cumulative of 750,477 cases and 8,934 fatalities throughout the pandemic. Statewide, 71.3% of those ages 12 and up are fully vaccinated. Skagit County public health cases through today, total cumulative cases 12,170, PCR positive 9,413, antigen positive 2,757. In the last 2 weeks, we've had 117 fatalities and 685 total hospitalized. And the county has reported as of last week a case rate of 735 cases per 100,000 over the previous 14 days. And hospitalization rate of 17.6 COVID patients per 100,000 over the previous 7 days. We've administered 189,055 vaccine doses in the county to date, and 69.3% of those ages 12 and up are fully vaccinated. The Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine is now available for children age 5 to 11 at Skagit Valley Fairground by appointment only, and booster doses are also available at the fairgrounds by appointment. Free antigen testing is limited to those who are currently symptomatic or have had recent exposure. And a reminder that Skagit Fairgrounds is not a good testing option for those seeking proof of negative test to attend an event or travel. Thank you. That's the COVID report this evening. Next up, we have Public Works Committee.
Mr. McDougall?
Moulton.
Thank you. We had our Public Works Committee meeting this afternoon at 5. Mr. Walters and I with Mr. Buckenmeyer and Ms. Tesh. And what we talked the most about is flooding that's happening all over the county. And city staff has been very involved in helping to prevent the water treatment plant from being flooded should the river level rise beyond 40 feet, which hopefully it will not. We're told that it is expected to peak between 38 and 39 feet, but in an abundance of caution, the staff from street department, water department, wastewater department, and the fire department all helped to wrap an ecology block wall and visqueen and sandbag it to help prevent flooding into the water treatment plant area. So thank you to all that staff who joined together to help out. Also, we've had some reports from constituents, of course, with the high winds that a lot of garbage cans have blown over and some were not able to be picked up by the garbage staff today. So thank you very much. People have been very patient and understanding that staff is doing the best that they can, and that their patience is much appreciated and has been also very much in evidence. So thank you to everyone there, because we know you understand how hard people are working. And also people have volunteered and been moving leaves out of the drain paths, so that actually helps a lot too to keep water from backing up. So thanks everyone for doing what you're doing. And I think that's all I have. Thanks.
All right, thank you. We'll move to number 5 on the agenda, public comment. So this is where anyone wishing to address the council on a topic that is not on today's published agenda may do so. Do we have anyone on who would like to speak to the council?
Hello? Hi, this is Joe Kunzler. Can you hear me?
Yep, we gotcha.
All right, thanks. I sent you some emails today, just trying to update you on the Skagit Transit situation. I speak only for me as a private citizen. I need to say it at the outset, but the Skagit Transit Board is going to be meeting Wednesday and may or may not be deciding at that meeting or the subsequent December meeting about routes for 2022. And I'm concerned for your community because right now, as we're all well aware, Washington State Ferries has a crisis in regards to its ability to provide service. And I really think Skagit Transit would be well suited to provide additional assistance to get people out of their cars and to walk on and off the ferries and to have a shuttle from the ferry terminal to downtown Anacortes to Burlington and Mount Vernon. And it's been decided by staff, unless the board speaks up, that instead of having the 2 to 4 trained operators, which are basically at this point like bars of gold, they're that valuable, to spend 3 to 5 trained operators on servicing Burlington with a circular at this critical time. And I just really questioned that decision, and I'll definitely make remarks to this Wednesday to a Skagit Transit Board. But that community of Burlington, their duly elected representative, has been very critical of any further investment in Skagit Transit, unlike your community and your representative. And I just really want to raise some awareness to your community because I'm a huge supporter of the state ferries. I'm a huge supporter of what Amy Scarton was trying to do with the state ferry system and turn it more into a transit system and part of an integrated network. As I'm also supportive of State Senator Lovelet and her work. So I hope I covered everything briefly and sufficiently for you this evening.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kunzler.
Thanks.
Any questions for him? Mr. Walters.
Mr. Kunzler, I don't think that we got your email. At least I certainly didn't. So please feel free to resend it to the whole council.
Sure. I'll just send the whole thread within the next 5 minutes.
Right.
I know that Lori got it and Bruce got it, and Jennifer Tottenham said she'd send it to the entire city council. So I'll take care of it too.
Great. Thanks for sharing it with the rest.
Yeah, I'll be watching the meeting Wednesday very carefully. Thanks.
All right, thank you. All right, any other public commenters? Okay, we'll move on to item number 6, our consent agenda.
Mr. McDougall,
Ms. Moulton.
I move that I never do this actually. I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. And now moving on, we've got item number 7, our public hearing this evening. The first one is Resolution 3057, resolution of reaffirming Ordinance 3095 and confirming the 6-month duration of interim regulations contained therein concerning acceptance of certain land use applications in the commercial use zone. So we have Mr. Meismer. Will you be addressing council?
Yes, Mr. McDougall.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council and the audience. Resolution 3057 reaffirms Ordinance 3095 related to interim regulations regarding the acceptance of certain land use applications in the commercial use zone related to self-service storage facilities and proposes the adoption of a work plan. Self-service storage facilities are currently listed as a permitted use in the commercial use zone per table 19.41.050. Self-service storage facilities include basic self-service storage, warehousing, mini storage, fully enclosed multi-storage storage. And while there are some design standards and block frontage standards, you could potentially have a building of 200,000 square feet that could potentially be very blocky. The significance of that is it could have a pretty significant impact on the commercial use zone as a passive rather than active use, such as retail or office space. So staff is proposing to start moving forward with community input at the Planning Commission level in November, December, and at this point, it's going to end up being the first Planning Commission in December is what I'm working towards. So with that, I would leave it to the council if they have any questions or if there are any questions or comments from the audience, as this is a public hearing.
Mr. McDougall.
Mr. Walters.
I guess just a word of encouragement to Mr. Meismer. It seems to me that this one is very simple and it doesn't involve drawing lines or drawing heights or drawing design standards. It's maybe just outright prohibition on this type of use fronting Commercial Avenue. It's also very important to invigoration of Commercial Avenue, where we have vacant storefronts or buildings with vacant frontage. We do see a deadening of activity on Commercial Avenue. So I'm hopeful that this one can move forward independent of the fact that we adopt it after some of our other interim ordinances, just so that we can knock this one out.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Meismer.
Thank you, Mr. Walters. Yes, the intent is that, as you mentioned, this seems to be a very straightforward one. We'd like to get it before the Planning Commission and then bring it straight back to the council with a recommendation.
Any other questions or comments? Do we have a motion to make at this time? Oh, yeah, we don't have any hands raised. So, yeah, at this time, I'll close the public hearing on Resolution 3057. Am I in the right place? Okay.
Mr. McDougall,
Ms. Moulton.
I move to approve Resolution 3057 as presented.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Ms. Hunt, would you take the vote, please?
Ms. Cleland McGrath,
Yes.
Ms. Moulton,
Yes.
Mr. McDougall,
Yes.
Mr. Carter,
Yes.
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you very much. We will move on now to item B, a public hearing. So we'll open a public hearing on Resolution 3058, which is updating the work plan adopted in Resolution 3005 regarding bonus height provisions in the R4 use zone west of commercial use zone related to Ordinance 3097. This moratorium to accept land use applications related to bonus height provisions in AMC 1942-050C, small units. So, Mr. Meismer, I believe again?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council and the audience. As Mr. McDougall mentioned, Resolution 3058 updates the work plan in regards to the R4 use zone bonus height restrictions. The current moratorium expired and there has been a new moratorium approved by the council. and it's now time for the Planning Commission to get started on this. We've been before the Planning Commission with an update and discussed some of the various alternatives. The Planning Commission is excited about bringing this back and working with the community to determine what the next steps will be. The moratorium and the work plans have been extended several times due to unforeseen circumstances, especially with the current pandemic and how that's been playing out. The whole intent is that we, again, get this in front of the Planning Commission and then get community involvement as much as possible. And so with that, I leave it in the council's hands for public comment. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Thank you, Mr. Meismer. Yeah, both for this one and the previous one, the work plan is quite straightforward and a quick turnaround too. It looks like we're going to try to get things done by March. So with that, any questions or comments?
Mr. McDougall.
Mr. Walters?
I guess I would just offer that the Planning Commission may get their work done by March, but then it will come to us. And I expect we'll spend a good amount of time on it.
Thank you. Agreed. Do we have any comment from the audience? All right. Anything further up here? All right. With that, we'll close the public hearing on Resolution 3058. And do we have a motion?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Thank you. I think this timeline looks really good and will require quite a bit of effort from Planning Commission. So thank you in advance for taking this seriously. And I look forward to seeing it come to council. So I move to approve Resolution 3058 as presented.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Ms. Hunt, would you take the roll?
Ms. Moulton,
Yes.
Mr. McDougall,
Yes.
Mr. Carter,
Yes.
Mr. Walters,
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. All right, that is it for public hearings this evening. So we'll move to item number 8, other business. First item is a Housing Authority Board appointment. And I have to get to the right tab here. So the Mayor Gear would like to appoint Mr. William French to the Housing Authority Board. And I think it just needs a council motion to approve.
Mr. McDougall.
Mr. Walters.
I move we confirm the appointment of Mr. William French to the Housing Authority Board.
Second?
Thank you. A motion from Mr. Walters, second from Ms. Moulton. Do we take the roll on this one as well, or just, okay. I guess all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, our next one, we have a Museum Advisory Board appointment, and Mayor Gear would like to appoint Mr. Pat Dunn to the Museum Advisory Board.
Mr. McDougall.
Mr. Walters.
I think this is another excellent choice, and I move that we appoint or confirm the appointment of Mr. Pat Dunn to the Museum Advisory Board.
Second.
All right, a motion to approve from Mr. Walters, a second from Ms. Cleland McGrath. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. All right, our next item on the agenda is 8C, Resolution 3059, authorizing distribution of tourism promotion funds. For this one, Mr. Meismer again.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council and the audience. So the city received 22 lodging tax applications for the 2022 lodging tax funding timeframe, and to advertise, market, publicize, or distribute information, or even undertake other activities to attract visitors to Anacortes. The Lodging Tax Advisory Committee met October 7, October 14th, October 21st and October 28th to review applications and hear from applicants regarding their proposals, and to determine whether or not which one should go forward. The funding the committee recommends is based on expectations that this will help open the community to events and activities and encourage tourists and citizens to enjoy all the community has to offer, and in returning to a somewhat normal event activity for the year 2022. The funding allocated in 2020 for 2021 was not entirely spent. So approximately 69,454 of the 612,000 that was left over in that cycle, and that can move forward to help funding some of the applications in this particular cycle. So during the meetings with the applicants, the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee had ongoing conversation with the Chamber of Commerce in regards to their marketing and advertising. And the Chamber's representative basically said that if they had an additional $25,000, they'd be able to market and advertise further out and bring more people in with that marketing and advertisement. And so, having discussed that, the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee recommended that additional 25,000. So that's why you might see a little difference in what was requested by the chamber and what the committee actually recommended for that use. And so even with the fewer events in 2021, as we start moving into the final months of this year, what we're hearing from the hoteliers is that they've had a really good uptick in overnight stays in the last 6 months here. And so that's a really good indicator that if we get the word out, 2022 can be a very good year for tourism with Anacortes. So the total annual projects are 400 of, regular projects, so 483,826. Capital projects are 216,785, with a total expenditure of 550,111. And the current fund balance is 1,240,000. So one of the things that is being asked for in the capital funding is a trailer which would store barricades, cones, orange cones, lights for the barricades, and signage for folks who are doing events such as the Christmas tree lighting. What we would do then is those folks who are doing events would check out the trailer. City staff would drop it off at the City Hall parking lot, and those folks that are putting on the event could distribute the cones and the signs and stuff like that. Typically, an event organizer would have to pay somewhere between $500 and $700 to rent all that stuff. So it's a considerable savings to the event organizers in that. Other than that, if the council members have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. There are a couple of other capital projects, the museum interpretive signs, Washington Park restroom, the Publix Park restroom cleaning, which we normally do with LTAC, the Rotary Trail up at Cap Sante, and then again, the trailer I mentioned. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Otherwise, staff recommends approval of the resolution 3059.
Mr. McDougall. There are a couple of these that don't obviously fit into the statutory framework for spending lodging tax dollars. Lodging tax can't be spent on just anything. It's got to be spent on a limited number of things that comply with the statute, basically those that help attract tourists. So for instance, the city Washington Park restroom construction, we did explore that one on the finance committee. It's certainly not obviously a function that attracts tourists, but in fact, Washington Park is used by quite a bit more tourists than residents. So in my judgment, that one checks that box. And it also makes up the remaining money that we need to improve that restroom. and allows us to use some other money that we have from leftover from LID fund for this project. So that makes sense to me. The Rotary Capsana Trail, though, what is our theoretical justification for how that one fits into the statutorily allowed expenses?
Great question. Thank you, Mr. Walters. So the thought is that the Cap Sene lookout gets a lot of tourists. You know, it's recommended as a trail area by our museum. We're reestablishing the Cap Sene sign up at the top. And, with the trail, they're also proposing a lookout platform. So I think that what that does is it allows for the tourism activity to further enjoy the Cap Sene Park area.
Okay. So theoretically, then, we wouldn't be seeking to use lodging tax dollars for just any trail construction, but this one in particular would fit the requirements?
Yes, in my opinion, it does fit the requirements. We've also had a good conversation with Mr. Hoagland about it as well.
Okay. As a general matter, I think that it seems here that we are spending down quite a bit of the money that's in our lodging tax fund. And a couple of years ago, we did write a strategic plan for the lodging tax money. It suggested that we set aside 25% of yearly revenues for capital projects. And I think that's why we see set out here in a different column the capital project requests. So I'm not suggesting that's inconsistent with our strategic plan. But I do think we ought to be thinking bigger, because supposedly in 2 years, the port is going to shut down use of the transit shed for community events. And I think it's incumbent upon the city, much more so than the port, to provide a space for community events. And lodging tax is actually, it has a number of allowed uses, and one of them is a community events center. And if we thought large enough and made some hard choices about what ordinary events we support, and instead started socking away some more money, the constant stream of lodging tax revenue could support financing for an event center, a modest event center, not a conference center, not a convention center, but a large room, hopefully one that could take advantage of the Anacortes waterfront and support community events like the Friends of the Forest dinner, like the Arts Festival dinner, like the art show, like Beer on the Pier, and the other events that we support with lodging tax dollars. I think that getting us there will require us to have a plan, have some conversations with the port, maybe some other property owners, but I don't see how we get there without a funding source. This is the most obvious one. The port seems to have indicated that they have other more important uses for their money, especially the environmental cleanups that they're engaged in. I don't think that we'll be able to continue handing out money at the rate that we have been, just handing out money to people who have requested it from this funding source, and also accomplish that goal, if that is a goal that is shared by the rest of the council. But I think we ought to start having that conversation, because a lot of money is going out the door here in this year. And that money, I mean, it's $500,000 that could be going towards funding an event center that maybe has a price tag of $5 million, depending on the level of amenities and the cost of property and operations. This could really be a big chunk of that. So I would encourage us to start thinking in those terms.
Mayor Pro Tem, if I may.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Walters. I'd also like to mention that in the coming year, 2022, staff will be working with council to update the tourism promotion strategic plan. And so that, in fact, would be, I think that would fit right in with Mr. Walters' suggesting that we have that discussion in regards to the event center.
Thank you, Mr. Meismer.
Mayor Pro Tem? Thank
Ms.
you.
Moulton?
Thanks. Mr. Meismer, I just wanted to mention that I'm excited to see places where not a huge investment can go a very long way. For example, $2,000 for the City Library Genre Night, which I know is a huge hit for so many people. I've been to a couple, and they're really fantastic events, and I think that is money very well spent. I'm also excited to see the Arts Fest art store that the Arts Foundation will be creating, and the Farmers Market, the Anacortes Music Project. I mean, all of these things are, the whole list really contributes so much to our community and those tangible and intangible amenities that we love so much in living here, and that we welcome visitors with, that they love also. So I think it's a great list, and I'm glad to see it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Ms. Cleland McGrath?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Ms. Moulton said, is the fact that it's heartwarming to see all of these events that existed prior to 2020, that they have lasted and are going strong moving forward. So I think we're really lucky. We weren't sure what that would look like when it was March, April, and May of 2020, but to see these wonderful organizations kind of moving forward with enthusiasm. So thank you for all those folks who have supported it through this difficult time. That being said, I'm going to recuse myself from voting on this because I am still currently on the Arts Festival Board, and they are one of the recipients. So thank you.
Any other comments or questions on this item? Do we have anything?
Mr. McDougall.
Yeah, Mr. Walters.
Quick question for Mr. Meismer. This is an outlay of $550,000. What's our annual lodging tax revenue?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Walters. Yeah, you know, I remember working with Mr. Hoagland on this. I want to say the projected annual revenue will come in right around between 450 to 510, 20. I don't have the exact number in front of me. My apologies.
Mr. McDougall, if you can, yeah, apologize for the late entry there. If you can bear with me for just a moment, I'll get to that that budgeted amount just momentarily.
I think it's about 442.
Okay.
Yes, I believe it is over 400,000 is, and it might be trending even beyond that. When we put the budget together, yeah, so we have 476,000 budgeted for 2022. When we put those revenue projections together, we base it on the amount of revenue collected to that point. We start putting these revenue projections together in, June, July, something like that. But that's one of the revenue streams that has continued to strengthen as the year has gone on. So that budget of 476,000, it wouldn't surprise me at all to see that surpassed once we get into the year next year, if things continue on as they have been. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, Ms. Moulton.
I would like to mention also that what Mr. Walters said about spending not all of what we have. I would like to work on that next year because I think that's pretty important to do, is to not spend more than we have and in fact save some, keep some aside. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I feel similarly. I think in this case, after a rough year and a half, close to 2 years, giving it a little bit of an extra boost for these organizations that have managed to make it through the pandemic is great. At the same time, I look forward to having a larger conversation around, like essentially the strategic plan for this kind of funds. So I think an event center kind of thing is definitely something worth considering. So. Any other comments at this time?
Mr. McDougall.
Mr. Walters.
Yeah, and the big ticket items in here are the ones that are obvious targets for trimming down. We don't have that authority here, though, at council because of the state statute. We're able to accept these suggestions or send it back for revision by the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee. So I move that we approve Resolution 3059 as presented.
Second?
Thank you. We have a motion to approve by Mr. Walters, a second from Ms. Moulton. Ms. Hunt, would you take the roll?
Mr. McDougall?
Yes.
Mr. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath?
I'm recusing myself.
Ms. Moulton?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you. We will now move on to item 8D, Conservation Easement Program and new parcels. And Mr. Lunsford, I believe, for this item.
Yes, good evening, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you. Thank you, council members. So I'm going to start to share my screen here so we can pull up a presentation. Okay. So after the Conservation Easement Program was created in 1998, the Anacortes Community Forest Lands acquired 5 parcels of land that do not have conservation protection in their deeds. These parcels total approximately 237 acres. Due to generous donors in our community, which we have many of, we have raised the funds to cover the cost of putting this acreage into the easement program. However, we wanted to come to you tonight to answer any questions before we just ended up putting this new acreage into the conservation easement deed that we're working on with the Skagit Land Trust. We didn't want to surprise you, in other words. We want to give you a chance to ask questions and discuss anything you'd like to about these 5 parcels. So you can see on the screen, numbered 1 through 5. Number 1 was donated by the Strandberg and Welch families, part of the Fircrest development. Number 2 is the old sewer land that the city purchased, the sewer fund purchased in the late 80s, and then was purchased by the Parks Department, having to repay that fund according to state statute. Parcel 3 is the McIntyre parcel that was purchased around 2001. Parcel 4 is 20 acres. It was purchased from the Udd family on the south side of Mount Airy. And parcel 5 is the land that was purchased from the Van Buren McLean family. So this slide kind of tells you a bit more about those pieces, their parcel numbers, a little bit of history about them. So again, our desire was to bring this to you. It can be a short or long conversation. It's up to you. And just so that you weren't surprised when you saw 237 new acres in the conservation easement program without your consideration, because this was not included in the 1998 contract. So if you have any questions or would like to go back to look at other slides, which I'll do now, I'm all ears.
Thank you, Mr. Lunsford. Mr. Walters.
Mr. McDougall, first of all, can we turn that down a little bit? It is just way too loud.
Okay.
I don't think it's just me. Mr. Lunsford, thank you for the presentation. I think it's excellent, and I'm really glad to see these additional acreage, these pieces being added to the ACFL. The whole point of the ACFL easement program is to not trust us political types with the acreage, but to give away our development rights for the donation of $1,000 an acre to Skagit Land Trust. So we've got that third party protecting the forest, not just us. So I'm very glad that you have identified these, and I'm glad to see those come forward in the future. I certainly have no problem with it. I would encourage it.
Great, thank you, Mr. Walters.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Lunsford, on our map here, we have obviously the red parcels are the ones that we're looking to approve. Oh, actually, really quickly, how large is parcel number 2? I noticed on the other slide we've got sizes for the 1, 3, 4, and 5, but the biggie there,
It's 160 acres.
fantastic. So we're looking to add well over 200 acres then in total to conservation easement.
Yes, and we have, thank you, Mr. McDougall. Yes, so we have found some other parcels, small pieces of city water department land that became ACFL by going through this process. So we found a small 5-acre parcel that's always been a part of the city that we had not identified, and a smaller 2-acre parcel that was always part of the city since the 1960s or early 70s. That was part of a land swap at the time near Lake Erie. So just going through this process, we've gone over it like we never have before. And so thanks to Mr. Hoxie in our GIS department, thanks to Michael Kirschenbaum and Conrad Legal with the Skagit Land Trust and Regina Wandler for their help and persistence, because it's taken quite a while to get here to make sure that we're doing this right. And what we're giving to council in a couple weeks is very thoroughly vetted.
Fantastic, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you, Mr. Lunsford. So in the future, when the city acquires more property for the forest lands, will it be a simple forward step, or will we do this every time, or the people ahead of us in the future?
We could put things into the next contract that would allow you to add land in a simple fashion. And so that's part of what we're going to be bringing to you when we come to you next, is how you would like to do that. And we'll suggest some things and work with Ms. Swetnam and the Land Trust to present that in a cohesive fashion for you to consider.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I had one quick question.
Mhm.
Hey, Mr. Lunsford, I'm looking at there's also some pink there, pinkish magenta colored, the pending parcels. Can you just give us a little explanation of what that means?
Absolutely. So that was land that was in the conservation easement program, and money has been set there by families or individuals wanting to preserve it. And so per the contract from 1998, you as council has to approve those. So those are already allowed to be approved. They just haven't received your final approval. And so that's what we'll do in one fell swoop in the coming weeks, if that's acceptable to you. But that's what that means. Thank you for noticing our varied colors. We tried to make it interesting.
Judging by the nods, that sounds very acceptable. And
Okay.
similar question, Mr. Lunsford, the available TBD blue.
So again, another good question. So at the Little Cranberry area, that 10 acres, that's where the A Avenue landfill is. So it's allowed to be conserved, but it just has not. City council and previous mayors and city staff have held it out for reasons such as that. That's a landfill. And then southwest of Heart Lake, you'll see 2 areas. One is the current area where the quarry mine is going on city land with Lakeside Industries. And just south of that was an area that was in dispute because a landowner claimed to have an easement through there. And so those areas were withheld from the program by previous councils, and so they could be reconsidered in the future because they are part of the existing contract for conservation. But they just were withheld.
Got it, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for the explanation of the third-party Skagit Land Trust conservation easement, or that role. The green sections protected by other means. So this is not via conservation easement brokered through Skagit Land Trust. What's the means that those are protected?
Great, thank you for another good question. So starting at the north, Little Cranberry area, those are protected. One is by a city ordinance. It's called Little Cranberry Park. That was in 1964. That's the lake area. And then to the west, and I believe to the south of that, east and to the south, were donations by Douglas Almond and others to make them part of the city forest land. Moving south to Heart Lake, that used to be Heart Lake State Park, and that was transferred to the city in 2001 with all conservation elements already in the deed and a reversionary clause if the city ever violated those deed issues of conservation. To the east, there's a 20-acre parcel that was donated by the Willette family, and that is, 20 acres, I'm sorry, and that was donated for park and forest purposes. And so that has some protection in the deed. Some may argue for more, but that has some protection already. And then the final part is around Mount Erie, and that was donated by both Gus Hensler and the Quanian Club, and those already have some protections in the deed language.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions or comments? And nothing from the audience at this time. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We'll come back. If you have no more questions, we'll come back in a few weeks with a version of the final deed for you to review and comment on there. Thank you.
That sounds great. And how would council like to proceed with the 5 parcels Mr. Lunsford presented us this evening?
Mr. McDougall?
Mr. Walters.
Sounds like we don't really need to take any action, but I think we all give a head nod, and he'll put them in the packet whenever he brings these other items forward.
All right, we've got
Exactly.
lots of head nodding, so let's do that. Thank you. All right, thanks, Mr. Lunsford. Now we'll move to item 8E. Oh, we do have a hand up. Yeah, Mr. Wetcher, please go ahead.
Good evening, council members. Brian Wetcher, 2407 Forest Park Lane. I'd just like to really commend staff of both the land trust and the city that has gotten us here with these parcels of land over these years. It's taken a long time to consolidate them, and I think the staff has done a wonderful job of bringing us to a point where we can consolidate all of the fringe in holdings and maximize the open space that we have within the forest lands. I think all of these are ready for approval as soon as they come back and the language is squared away with the new language for the land trust. And I think staff particularly, and not the least of which our map manager, who does this wonderfully, should be really commended on bringing us to this point so that we can bring all of these lands that have sort of languished for so long without easement back into the fold. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Wetcher. Completely agree. All right. Do we have any other comments? So, okay, we'll move to section 8E in the agenda. 2022 budget, a continued discussion. So we'll turn it over to Mr. Hovland.
Thank you, Mr. McDougall. Once again, will attempt to share my screen. I put a few slides together and just wanted to go through them kind of quickly. I think that's got it. So what I'm concentrating on here to begin with are the 3 largest tax revenues that we have. These 3 revenue streams make up 75% of the city's annual tax collection. So they are the 3 most important tax revenue streams that we have. So we do keep close tabs on them. Over the last several years, this is showing going back 6 years, the simple matrix shows these 3 revenue streams and the actual collection 2015 through 2020 and the amount of change in each of those revenue streams. You're seeing property tax that's pretty consistent, 2.3 to 2.9% per year. As we've discussed in the past, there's a 1% annual increase that's allowable if city council adopts that increase by ordinance, and then additionally new construction gets added to the tax roll, so that's why the increase above the 1% Sales tax is much more volatile. You'll see in 2018, and I'll refer to this a number of times, there's a big increase in that revenue stream in 2018, and that was from the high school construction project. And then the following year, a large drop of 14%, but that's relative to the prior year. So, and then utility tax has been, pretty consistent. We'll talk more about each of these in more detail, but you'll see this last completed year in 2020 utility tax at only a 1% increase. And again, 2020, the COVID year, that's had impact across the board in a number of areas, but we'll dig into each of these a little more. This is just more information, more detail on the property tax. So the property tax levy is budget-based, which means the 1% increase per year is based on the existing levy or the existing budget. So for example, if you look at 2021, the bottom row here, the levy amount of $5,385,680. That's the actual levy collected by Skagit County for the city of Anacortes. So 1% increase would be $53,856.80. As I said, new construction is also added to the tax rolls each year. And we do budget this relatively conservatively. It's not a huge amount, but generally we want to end the year with collecting more than we actually budgeted for. Sales tax, looking at the last 6 years again, the increases you can see pretty consistent year to year, with the exception again of 2019 just dropping off relative to 2018. But then in 2020, the COVID year, this amount change of $229,000. This is relative to the prior year of 2019. Normally we would expect to see somewhere between 8 to 12% increase year over year. So it wasn't just a $229,000 decrease in that revenue stream. If you consider that we would normally expect to see something closer to 10% over the prior year, that's more like a 15% swing from year to year. I did want to point out it includes the sales tax the city receives includes deliveries. So if you were to make a purchase out of town in a different city, for example, if you go over to Burlington and purchase something and choose to have it delivered to Anacortes, the city of Anacortes would get that sales tax for that item. If you had that item put in the back of your vehicle and drove it home, then the city you purchased it in would get that sales tax. And that includes online sales as well. So items purchased online that are delivered into the city of Anacortes, the city does receive that sales tax from that item. Utility tax, I know we've talked about all of these before. A lot of this is kind of a refresher, but utility tax, it can get a little bit complicated because we do have two parts of that tax revenue stream, and that is for public utilities and private utilities. And we didn't start splitting that out in our cash receipting system until 2017. So 2018 was the first year that we had a complete data set on public versus private utility tax. So the private utilities is made up of natural gas, electricity, phone, cable, TV, all those services that are purchased. In addition to commercial solid waste is also included in here. The public utilities are the utilities that the city provides. We look at the combination of these three over the last several years. You can see in 2015, those three totaled 11.7 million, and a pretty consistent increase year to year, 5.2%. This is the combination of these three large revenue streams. 2017 was up 6.2% compared to the prior year. 18 was up 12.8%, and this is primarily because of the sales tax. You can see that 32% jump in that 1 year. And then back down to 14.2. So if you look at, kind of like draw an average line through this, is 14.2. If you level out 2017 and 18, it's still a pretty steady increasing line through that until we get to 2020 with COVID, and then the overall decrease of 0.5% compared to the prior year. Just looking at it in a pie form, it just shows kind of the relative size of each of these revenue streams being pretty equivalent. So from 2015 through 2020, utility tax represented 28% of that total, property tax 37%, sales tax 35%. And looking into 2021, the projections based on historical norms, actual collections through 2018, and then historical collections actual collections through October, and then historical collections based on the last 2 months of our historical data, puts 2021 at about 15 million, just over 15 million for the combination of those three revenue streams. So comparing that to our original budget of 14.1 million, that's a pretty significant increase that we're projecting to receive over what we had originally budgeted. And the biggest increase out of these is in sales tax. You can see the sales tax is projecting to be 13.5% over what we collected in 2020 compared to our original budget. We were essentially budgeting flat sales tax from 2020 to 2021. So the actuals is far exceeding that. And then what we are budgeting in 2022. So again, I made this comment a little bit ago when we were talking about lodging tax. When we first put some of these projections together, we had just around a half a year, maybe a little more, 6, 7, maybe 8 months worth of data that we were basing these projections on. But as we're getting now closer to the end of the year and we have a fuller data set, it's becoming evident that the sales tax related sales related revenue streams, sales tax, lodging tax, those are exceeding what we had previously expected. So, and what I'm thinking now, this bottom bullet here, if the 2021 recovery that we've seen continues into 2022 and beyond, this 1.9% overall increase that we're projecting right now, this is what's currently in our revenue budget. If things continue like they have this year, we could easily exceed that. But the overall relative distribution of those three major revenue streams is relatively the same. Utility tax 20%, property tax and sales tax both at 36%. This is just a look at looking at the data, the actual collections for the last several years. And you can see all three of these revenue streams, steadily increasing. What I was trying to show here, when we look at the totals, you can see the totals are increasing, but the percentage increase, particularly in utility tax, you can see that the gray line here. It's kind of flattening out. It's still increasing, but it's increasing at a decreasing rate. So we're seeing that utility tax revenue stream start to shrink a little bit, and that's because of the private side of the utility tax. So the public side is still growing at the historical norms, 6 to 8% per year, but the private utility tax is pretty flat. I wanted to jump over to impact fees real quick. There was some comments about impact fees last week, and particularly the fire impact fees and how those may be related to the ladder truck. The ladder truck, again, is budgeted in the 2022 fire department budget. We have $1.5 million allocated in the expenditure budget, and that is offset on the revenue side with a $1.5 million loan. So the loan that we've been looking at is the local program through the state treasurer's office. It's a 10-year term at the rate fluctuates depending on the market. It's currently at 1.25%. So 1.5 million at 10 years at 1.25%. generates about $160,504 per year debt service requirement. So our fire impact fees, I think we currently have about 240,000 in cash in fire impact fees right now, and this is the collections over the last few years. You can see here in 2019 is when those fire impact fees were increased, and that revenue stream got a big shot in the arm, 124,000 that year. We collected 51,000 in 2020. So far, 63,000 through October. So we're on pace to collect probably around 75 to 80,000 based on historical norms. So that's not quite a half of what that payment would be, but probably at least a third based on historical norms of what that debt service requirement would be. And the collection of cash so far, about 20% of what that initial cost is what we have in cash right now.
Mr. McDougall.
Mr. Walters.
Mr. Hoagland, you say we've got 20% of the 1.5. Is that what you just said?
Yes, we have about 240,000 in cash.
Okay. And when this first came up, you suggested that we give a head nod to authorizing this purchase during 2021 so that we get the benefit of 2021 pricing on the vehicle. What's the margin between 2021 and 2022 pricing? Was it 10%, 15%? What was the difference?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I want to say it was 20%, and
20%.
Yeah, it was a really significant number.
10? Okay, well, 10's big enough, but 20 is extraordinary. But what's our deadline for making that authorization so that we get the benefit of the discounted or ordinary 2021 pricing?
Yeah, it's year end. As long as we get the order placed, we don't have to pay for it, but as long as we get the order placed before year end.
Okay.
This year.
Mayor Pro Tem. Yeah, my notes from a couple weeks ago said it was a 10% increase was what they were expecting it to be.
Okay.
So my one question was for Mr. Hoagland is, part of the reason this is such an impact on our budget is the fact that our current ladder truck was donated and we never stocked away money in our R&R funds for it. So what kind of impact will that have once it's purchased for the budget? How much are we expecting to have to kind of plan ahead and reserve money for the future replacement of the next ladder truck?
Yeah, it's a great question. And because of the term of this program, 10 years, and the generally the life of those fire trucks is 20 years. What the thinking is, once we get this debt service worked into our budget, we'll just retain that within the budget from year to year. Even once it's paid off at year 10, we keep that 160,000 in there years 11 through 20, and then we'll essentially save up for that next truck during that second year term, or during that second 10 years. So the discussions we've been having internally is that 160,000 a year, we would just plan on paying that every year to ourselves, years 11 through 20, once the truck was paid off, and then put that money into that replacement fund in the ER&R fund.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Walters.
Mr. Hoagland, is 100% of the expense of the truck fire impact fee eligible?
Yes, it is. So yeah, if we were to collect that much in fire impact fees in a single year, we could allocate the entire amount towards that.
Well, we're not going to collect that much in impact fees in a single year, right? But we'll use it to pay off 100% of the debt.
But yeah, we could use it. Yes.
If we got that much, okay.
It is fire impact fee eligible. Yep.
So when we approve the budget, this item is in it. Will that be sufficient for you or fire chief to make the order, get us the good pricing? Okay.
Absolutely.
That'll happen before the end of the year. So do I interpret correctly that there's no real separate urgency then to
yeah, and I'm happy to to tie back with the fire department on this. I can talk with them tomorrow to make sure that there isn't, additional lead time that I'm unaware of.
Okay. Yeah, we definitely don't want to waste $150,000 because we're a little late.
Yeah, very true. Okay. Yeah, good questions. Just a couple more slides I wanted to go through, and this is related to the utility funds, and specifically the water and sewer utilities. You may remember from our review of the Public Works budget, the sewer fund has a $20 million increase in the budget for 2022 over the 2021 budget, and that's primarily from the sewer outfall project. It's all from capital. I think capital increases something like 23 million. But it's, yeah, the biggest chunk of that is the sewer outfall. But I wanted to go back to how we were paying for that. And that brings us back to the revenue bond issue that we did in 2020, in October of 2020. We did a revenue bond issue. It's based, when we do these utility bonds, these revenue bonds, we combine our 4 utilities into a revenue or into a utility system. So that's why the title of this, and this is a screenshot directly from the final pricing report when we issued the bond. It's Utility System Revenue and Refunding Bond 2020, and there were 3 items that we obtained money for. One of them was to refund the 2010 bonds. And this is the BABs, the BABs, that stands for Build America bonds. That was the type of bond that was authorized under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act back in 2009 or 2010. And these bonds had a better interest rate for the city. So that's what we purchased. So we refunded about 7 million of those and then paid off about 21.2 million of those. So we used a lot of the refinery pay ahead money for that. And then because our debt load was smaller, we were able to extinguish part of our debt reserve cash that we had on hand as well. So, so we defeased about 21.2 million of those bonds, refunded about 7. The other new money, we got 10.1 million for the sewer fund. This is new money for the sewer fund, and then 13.1 million for the water fund. So I listed out on the left side here the 3 uses: to refund the 2010 bonds, obtain money for sewer projects, and money for water projects. And the details of each of those, this is a slide related to the water utility. And this is a screenshot from the official statement that shows the description of what those bond proceeds would be used for the water utility. And it includes construction of raw water line, construction of additional clear well, acquisition of a risk and resiliency detection system. I refer to that up here as the Craley sensing system, and acquisition of additional property, which that property purchase was done last year. And then we also have other language in here, or other improvements as may be approved by City Council. So in this case, we have exhausted the entire 13.1 million that was obtained for the water fund. So we didn't tap into any of those additional projects that may be approved by council. So the additional debt service for the water utility from that is 810,300. Keeping in mind from the city retail rate side of the equation, the city is responsible for approximately 11% of the regional system. That's how much water the city retail system consumes. So we're responsible for 11% of those regional costs. So our existing rate structure is well situated to take care of that additional portion of that debt service at 89,000 per year. The
Mayor
sewer
Pro Tem?
side,
Ms. Molden.
Thanks. Well, Mr. Hoagland, thank you. I just wanted to thank you for making it clear that our existing rate structure is sufficient to meet our obligation to that debt service, that we will not be raising rates in order to pay for that. I think there might have been some confusion about that. Thanks.
right. Thank you. And this is the last slide I have, but similar to the water utility, this is for the sewer utility. I have 2020 there, I apologize. The 2022 sewer budget has 19.5 million budgeted for new outfall. And the funding to pay for that, when you look at the budgeted revenues for the sewer fund, is split between a FEMA grant and cash reserves. And the cash reserves are from this 10.1 million in new money that was obtained for the sewer fund. And this is again out of the official statement from that bond issue of what that money can be used for. And it identifies here the construction of a new outfall pipeline for the city's wastewater plant and other city utility improvements as may be approved by city council. So I still haven't heard what that final grant amount from FEMA is going to be. I don't know if we've heard that yet, but there's been some discussion about that, and I don't know what the final number is at this point. But that's precisely why this additional language is in here. If FEMA were to come back and give $15 million towards that outfall, and we had $5 million left from that bond issue, then we could use it in other projects that have been identified in the CFP that council approved, and we could expend that additional money from the bond issue. So that additional debt service is $613,600. So the additional cost of that money moving forward, the sewer portion of that debt service, $13,600. So the existing rate structure that we have in place generates enough revenue to budget about 1.5 million per year in the pipeline replacement, not the main pipeline, but I think it's I&I infiltration and infusion for like cracked pipes that water gets into, and so high flow events, it creates issues at the treatment plant and with the outfall of getting that effluent out of the plant. So the use of that money is eligible to be used for this debt service because it's addressing the same issue. So the existing rate structure that we have in sewer is sufficient to meet this, and the plan all along has been to reduce our I&I funding each year if we need to, if cash flow determines that we need to reduce this, we will. Instead of 1.5 million, perhaps it's 900,000. The additional 600,000 would be used for debt service. But the point being that the existing rate structure that we have is sufficient to meet that debt service obligation in the sewer fund. So I know we covered a lot of ground. There was a lot of information there. I'm happy to answer questions or backtrack on any of this information if council has questions or would like to address additional points.
Thank you, Mr. Hoagland. So reminder, this is this evening is just discussion on the budget and questions, of course. So we're not going to be taking action this evening on it.
Mr. McDougall.
Mr. Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Hoagland, for the presentation. I think it is very important that we do step back and take a look at the budget from this level. Because as a general matter, we as elected officials, I don't want to implicate city staff, but also city staff, we don't do a good job of explaining the budget to the public. It's complicated. We talk only in terms of the budget when we speak, and not rather a more holistic picture of how the city is financed. It's somebody has said that balancing your checkbook at home is to balancing the city budget as going to the grocery store is to landing on the moon. It's not comparable because it's constrained by state law and state initiatives, and the money that we bring in, we can't just spend on anything. So for instance, Mr. Hoagland spoke about those three big tax sources, and together they are roughly $5 million each. Together they're $15 million, and the budget is $100 million. You know, they're only 15% of the budget. And if we don't make those things clear to people, then people get the impression that $50,000 doesn't matter and a 1% property tax hike doesn't matter. I'm here to tell you it does, because it's 1% every year. We've taken the 1% property tax, I think every year for 20 years since the 1% property tax hike limitation was imposed, because if we don't, we fall behind inflation. And with some quick math, I think that we would be 25% behind in property tax over 20 years if we hadn't taken the 1%. So that's like $1.5 million, almost. And if we were I think it's 1.25 million if you call it $5 million roughly. So if it's $1.25 million a year, we would be behind in property tax. That's 8 police officers, and that's who benefits from property tax, because that's how we fund police, and that's how we fund fire, and that's how we fund parks and the other general government services. So it's incredibly important, and it's really important that we do a good job explaining how this stuff works, so that people have a correct sense of how it operates and how important it is. The other 85 million or 100 million, you know, whatever it is from year to year, depending on our capital projects, is financed in entirely different methods, by user fees and grants and all of those other things. And it's really important that we make it clear how these constraints function and how we are able to raise the little revenue that we do. You know, comparisons from Anacortes to Mount Vernon are not comparable. Anacortes pumps water to 60,000 people, and Mount Vernon pumps it to 0. There's a whole lot of complication in this. So I think that we really do need to spend the next year really honing in on how to explain the budget, how to fully understand it. Maybe we take off some of the dollars and cents that are on that slide and focus on the big picture numbers so that we can have that big picture. Moving forward here, I would like to authorize the new fire truck, because it's that 10% savings. That's big money by itself, but I think it's also another 10% savings if we pay for it up front. I think that's probably what Mr. Hoagland was referring to, in one big chunk rather than finance it. And if there's any preparation that needs to be done to make that happen, I would like us to get working on doing that preparation, because together that's $300,000. Like, that's real money. Obviously, I think we ought to plan to take the 1% property tax, and it's built into the proposed budget, so if we wanted to not take it, we'd have to try to fill that hole. But then I think we also ought to take a look at the facilities projects that are in the budget, because they are also general revenue, a lot of them at least, and they add up. One of them is $300,000 for a new elevator in this building. We really ought to take a hard look at that before committing to that. The elevator is in tough shape. It does need to be replaced, but this building is costing us a lot of money. And $300,000 is another big chunk. I do think that we are headed in generally a good direction on our facilities projects, replacing roofs, because that helps preserve the facilities that are underneath them. But those aren't strings in the budget. So as we've seen in prior years, sometimes that money gets spent on other things, and I'd like to have a little bit more clarity on each of those projects before moving forward. And maybe there are other things too, but those are a couple big items that I've thought of so far.
Thank you. Yeah, and I really appreciate the comments on the complexity of the budget and the fact that, you know, the city of Anacortes' budget has really, you can think of it as two big sort of subsections. There's the actual budget that is funding the city operations, and this includes, you know, what's happening in City Hall as well as fire and police. And then there's the utilities themselves, and the utilities are their own separate lines of business, and they are funded separately. The planning processes, they all appear to happen kind of in parallel and the same because we're dealing with them and staff is dealing with them kind of simultaneously, but they very much are separate. I think of them as business entities. And so when you look at just the raw numbers of the city of Anacortes, it does look like we're a city the size of Mount Vernon from a dollar figure standpoint, when in reality, we have this massive utility that is, like you said, providing water to 60,000 people in a pair of very large refineries. So our budget is bigger than our population because we run these, I think, really tremendous utilities. So thank you for pointing that out. Do we have any other questions or comments for Mr. Hoagland? Or, okay. Anything
Mayor.
from, oh, yeah, Mr. Floyd.
Yes, I would just like to submit my request to the council. My original budget that was submitted to Mr. Hoagland included one new position for an officer in 2022. That was removed from the budget to be able to hand council a more balanced draft budget. And I'm here tonight to ask you to give serious consideration for adding that new position back into the budget for the police department in 2022. Our current staffing at the police department is 27 commissioned positions. The current city comprehensive plan adopted by council in 2016, using a formula that in that plan would equate to about 30 commissioned positions. And while I believe that current formula in the comprehensive plan may be a little bit of an outdated model calculation, I do believe it's an accurate baseline that could be enhanced by analyzing other factors that contribute to calculations for staffing needs. Examples of drastic changes that have occurred in the laws and the requirements for my staff in the last 5 years. A good example would be our response to domestic violence calls. So previously, if we received a call for domestic violence, we would respond, interview all the involved parties, document any injuries, photograph the scene, hand out resource cards to involved parties and victims, transport the subject to jail, and complete the appropriate booking paperwork. Pursuant to new requirements in previous legislative sessions in the last 2 to 3 years, we're now required to complete a comprehensive interview about any presence of firearms in the residence, offer the opportunity to collect those firearms if the victim so chooses us to do so. We have to put them on the phone with a domestic violence advocate and assist them through that process. All these things take a significant amount more of staff time to be able to complete. So what would previously have been maybe a 45-minute call response is now doubled or more in time. Another example of increased staff demands for staff time is the de-escalation steps that we now must complete in response to many non-criminal complaints. And it was specific in the new laws. It mentions taking as much time as necessary. And while that's a subjective step in that process, it is incumbent upon us to take that additional time for the interest of public safety to come out to the best resolution possible. So given the increased demands on time for calls that we're currently responding to, the need to adjust staffing levels accordingly has become more present to me. At current staffing levels, I'm forced to choose between an additional general crimes detective and a detective assigned to the regional drug and organized crime task force. With changes to the drug statute, enforcement of user level drug crimes is very challenging right now. And I can tie nearly all classifications of crime back to illicit drug use. I feel one of the best ways to address this issue, as it all relates to our community in the form of property crimes and other crimes against persons, is to address the drug dealers by putting a member on the regional drug and organized crime task force. That does not take away the need for a third general crimes detective. It's essential to the police department that we keep up with digital forensic evidence examinations for cell phones, computers, tablets, and other digital devices. Crimes are becoming more complex all the time, and there are very few felony crimes currently that do not require some level of digital forensic examination. Crimes are going to continue to become more complex, and victimizers are constantly evolving new ways to commit criminal activity online and victimize members of our community. So we've invested in software tools and training to be able to address these issues, but the reality is a third general crimes detective is necessary to be able to properly investigate these crimes and move forward with a successful prosecution of the offenders. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Mr. McDougall.
Mr. Walters.
Chief Floyd, what's the fully burdened cost of a new police officer like you're suggesting?
That would depend on whether we are able to bring in a lateral entry candidate that would start above step one, or whether it would be a entry-level candidate that would be at step one and then we'd be subsequently sending to the academy. So the answer to your question would depend on who we are able to recruit.
Sure, but you know, we're doing the budget, so we need a number. High end, maybe. Mr. Hoagland.
McDougall, I believe the number for an entry level full cost of compensation is in the 125,000 range at step one.
Okay. And Chief Floyd, would you say that the shift in drug offenses from felony to misdemeanor, which puts them in municipal court rather than superior court, and other changes in the law that arguably make it more difficult to maybe investigate or prosecute, is that also adding to your future 2022 caseload and workload?
It conceivably has an effect. I'm currently working with our municipal prosecutor to try to reintroduce prosecution of drug crimes at the municipal level. That's going to take some significant coordination with treatment providers so we can comply with the current state statute to refer the first two offenses for drug offenders prior to prosecuting any subsequent offenses. And in the process of that, I foresee later in 2022, if we're successful being able to prosecute those crimes in municipal court, we'll be back at the levels for drug enforcement that we were previously. It'll just be a greater burden on our municipal court clerks and judges to prosecute those instead of sending them to the county prosecutor's office.
Well, so that's consistent with my sense of it, that we probably need to be prepared to invest more in the police department, but maybe also more in our municipal court. And maybe that means also more in public defense. But it strikes me, you know, if we are successful in prosecuting those crimes, it's going to cost us more because they'll shift to our court. I have sat with the police officers and heard them describe just the number of calls that come in and how maybe during the day they don't even get the chance to go to the bathroom because they're going from call to call to call. I think I also agree with Chief Floyd that the level of service number, the number of officers per 1,000 population, doesn't really make a lot of sense. I think we should get rid of that in the comprehensive plan. It probably makes sense for a larger department where, you know, it's a very rough number, and so rough numbers maybe work better for larger departments. But at the same time, I agree we need to have somebody on the Skagit County Interlocal Drug Task Force, and if we send somebody there, then we take somebody out of the police force here, and we need everybody that we can get here. So one more police officer here is probably not enough. Unfortunately, our system incentivizes us to keep coming back every year, asking for incremental improvements, but I think we ought to find a way to get another police officer here. You know, what's the solution to that? That strikes me as staff level analysis to bring us a proposal for what to cut or how otherwise to manage it. But I think we should head in that direction.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Did you want to go, Ms. Clem? Okay. Go ahead, Chief.
To Mr. Walters' point, I do agree that we should be moving closer to the 30 number, although I did not ask for more than one at this point because Chief Small had initiated the budget process earlier in the year, and at that time only asked for one additional person. While I feel that we definitely have a justifiable need for more than the one, I'm trying to be consistent with what we have asked from the very beginning part of the process and not asking council for change in mid part of the process, especially coming out of a pandemic with, at the time, were unpredictable revenue streams. It appears that Mr. Hoagland has given us a little peace of mind with those things.
Thank you, Chief. Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chief Floyd, for coming and making this presentation. I really appreciate it. You know, from just the limited number of kind of Washington City's presentations we've heard from the new legislation that came down from the state, and the impact it's going to have on our communities and specifically the police department, I find really concerning. I know that they're hoping to do some tweaks and refinement of the expectations and the changes for how police are supposed to respond to various situations. But regardless, our police department is out there every single day, and they're having to interpret to the best of their abilities. And from my limited knowledge, I don't understand how our police department is going to be able to perform to the level that they have in the past with all of this new regulation, following, as you've said, the de-escalation practices, following getting people on the phone for domestic violence issues, and just interpreting and disseminating information through all of our various officers. So thank you for coming and sharing this, and I think that it gives us some good food for thought that we're going to have to go back and really see how we can work that into the budget. But for folks who aren't aware yet, there are going to be some major changes and some growing pains, and hopefully we are able to continue to communicate with our public and kind of work through those challenges. But it'll be a tough one. So thank you for coming.
Anything else? I tend to agree. I'd like to try to find a way as we work through the budget in the next few weeks to try to get you that additional officer, Chief Floyd. So, any other comments or questions? Anyone from the audience? All right. I think this is our final item on the agenda. So If there's nothing else, thank you all this evening. Thank you, staff and directors, for your attendance and for providing all the information this evening. And we will close the meeting. So, thank you.